On October 7, 2023, the attacks launched by Hamas against Israel led to the beginning of a new war between Palestine and Israel. This war is a continuation of the long-standing conflict in the region. Today, the struggle between Palestine and Israel is generally thought to have started after the establishment of Israel in 1948. However, the roots of the issues in the region actually extend to approximately 3,000 years ago. In the 8th century BCE, largely the kingdoms of Judah and Israel dominated the present-day Israel and Palestine geography. These two kingdoms emerged as confederative structures formed by different Jewish tribes coming together. The ancestors of the Palestinians were organized in a confederation consisting of different settlements in the region from the current Gaza Strip to Tel Aviv. During this period, according to the sacred scripture known as the Old Testament, God had promised the region from the river to the Euphrates to the descendants of Abraham, the Israelites. Referred to as the Philistines in the Old Testament, the Palestinians were considered the natural enemies of the Jews because of their presence in the promised lands given by God to the Israelites. In 722 BCE, the Assyrian king Sargon launched a campaign against the kingdom of Israel and seized the region. As part of Sargon's population policy, the Assyrians deported the local populations to different places to prevent uprisings in the conquered regions and resettled their own people in the vacated areas. After the campaign in 722 BCE, Jews were also included in this practice and were deported to various regions of the Assyrian Empire. By the end of the 7th century BCE, the Babylonians had conquered the region by overthrowing the Assyrian Empire. The kingdom of Judah, centered in Jerusalem, was also among the conquered territories. The Jews rebelled against Babylonian rule, refusing to accept the authority of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. In 587 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar entered Jerusalem with his army, suppressing this rebellion. He later destroyed the Solomon's temple and sent the Jews into exile in Babylon to prevent any new uprising in the region. Thus, the Babylonian exile, which would last approximately 40 years, began. During this period, the balances in the Middle East were rapidly shifting. In 539 BCE, King Cyrus the Great of Persia defeated the Babylonian army in the Battle of Epochs, capturing the city of Babylon and putting an end to the Babylonian Empire. Cyrus pursued a policy that did not restrict the religions and freedoms of the people in the conquered regions but aimed to preserve their environments. According to this policy, he resettled the Jews in Jerusalem and ordered the reconstruction of the Solomon's temple, which had been destroyed by the Babylonians. Cyrus undertook these activities to gain a loyal community in the border region between Egypt and the Persian Empire known as Canaan. These activities were crucial for the Jews because during the Babylonian exile, they faced the risk of assimilation, like other Jewish tribes expelled by the Assyrians. However, Cyrus's conquest of Babylon shortened this exile, allowing the Jews to return to their homeland, Canaan. In 63 BCE, Jerusalem fell into the hands of the Roman Empire. After that, the Jews staged two major revolts against Rome. Following the first revolt in 66 CE, the Romans destroyed the Solomon's temple. In the second revolt in 132 CE, Jerusalem was razed, and a significant portion of the Jewish population in the city was killed. After this revolt, Jews were forbidden from entering Jerusalem, and many were captured by the Romans and sold as slaves in various parts of the empire. Despite the Roman oppression and destruction in Jerusalem, Jews sought to escape by migrating to different regions of the Roman Empire. Thus, the Jewish population in Jerusalem began to significantly decrease. In the period from the emergence of Christianity in the 1st century to the 4th century, Christianity became a widespread religion in Rome. During this time, when it was believed that the crucifixion of Jesus led to his death, the pressure on Jews increased. The belief that Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem made the city a sacred place for Christians. Therefore, the ban on Jews entering Jerusalem, believed to be the killers of Jesus, continued until the region was conquered by Muslims in 638. In 638, Jerusalem was captured by the Islamic army led by Caliph Umar. Umar lifted the ban on Jews entering Jerusalem, allowing them to settle in the city and practice their religion freely. Christians and Jews in the region were exempted from their religious beliefs in their daily lives and commercial activities, provided they paid the jizya tax imposed on non-Muslims annually. Jews were able to enter Jerusalem freely for the first time in a long time. The Jewish population around Jerusalem covered only a small part of the original Jewish population. The majority of Jews lived in various regions of Europe. Jewish communities in Europe were largely excluded from society and lived without equal rights for a long time as Christianity spread throughout Europe. During this period, Jews clung tightly to their religion and culture as a defense mechanism, significantly hindering their assimilation. Since Jews were not allowed to own land in most Christian states, a significant portion of Jews turned to trade. By engaging in trade, many Jews became wealthy and ranked among the richest people in Europe by the 19th century. Through the efforts of wealthy and populous Jews, along with the ideological movements emerging with the French Revolution, Jews began to have equal rights with Christians in various countries in Europe. However, despite this, anti-Semitism was prevalent throughout Europe, and a significant portion of Jews lived in settlements called ghettos. It was during these times, in 1860, that Theodor Herzl, a Jewish journalist born, believed that Jews needed to establish a Jewish state in Palestine to escape the dangers of anti-Semitism and assimilation. Theodor explicitly stated his thoughts on this matter in the books he wrote and the newspapers he published. His ideas were supported by Jews who faced discrimination in various parts of Europe. As a result, with Theodor's efforts, the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland, in 1897. The Zionist movement quickly gained the interest of many wealthy Jewish businessmen and received significant financial support. By 1901, with the support of wealthy businessmen, Theodor met with Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid II to discuss the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. During the meeting, the offer to pay off the Ottoman Empire's external debts in exchange for giving Jerusalem and its surroundings to the Jews was proposed. However, this proposal was rejected by Sultan Abdul Hamid. By the time 1914 arrived, one of the largest wars in world history erupted, World War I. The Ottoman Empire joined this war on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary. In 1917, while the war was still ongoing, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a letter to Lord Lionel Walter Rothschild, a Jewish businessman and one of the biggest supporters of the Zionist movement. In the letter, Balfour briefly expressed that the British government viewed favorably the idea of establishing a homeland for Jews in Palestine, and that any support in this direction would be provided. The British government aimed to encourage the Jewish community in the United States to support England with this decision and thus create public opinion in favor of going to war on the side of England in the ongoing war. Another goal was to secure the region around the Suez Canal, which was of great importance to England, by settling a Jewish population. After the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and Palestine came under British control. The influx of Jewish migrations to British-controlled Palestine led to a significant increase in the Jewish population in the region. Especially, the anti-Jewish policies of the Nazi regime in power in Germany accelerated this migration. By the time World War I ended in 1945, the Jewish population in Palestine had reached about 500,000. This number represented more than 30% of the total population in the region. Facing economic problems after World War I, Britain decided to withdraw from its colonies to reduce military expenses. Palestine was included in these withdrawal plans, and the issue of establishing what kind of administration would be transferred to the United Nations. According to the decision taken by the United Nations General Assembly on November 29, 1947, a Jewish state would be established in 56% of Palestine, an Arab state in 42%, and Jerusalem would form a new region under international administration. While 33 countries accepted this decision, 13 countries, including Turkey, rejected it on the grounds of injustice. However, with the majority, the decision passed the General Assembly, and on May 14, 1948, the Jewish National Council, gathered in Tel Aviv, declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The next day, the British left the region. Immediately after that, Israel's neighbors, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, declared war on Israel. From the perspective of Arab countries, the purpose of the war was to capture the capital of Israel, Tel Aviv, and completely expel Jews from Palestine. Israel, which used its resources and manpower more effectively, emerged as the winner in the war that lasted until March 1949. After the war, Israel signed separate agreements with each country it fought. According to these agreements, the Gaza Strip was left to Egypt, while the West Bank came under Jordanian control. A division occurred between the western part of Jerusalem, which became part of Israel, and the eastern part, which belonged to Jordan. Apart from these areas, a significant portion of the land granted to Palestine by the United Nations fell under the control of Israel. As a result, Israel increased its control over the land allocated by the United Nations from 56% to 78%. By the year 1956, Gamal Abdel Nasser became the president of Egypt. Nasser maintained good relations with the Soviet Union and purchased a considerable number of weapons from the Soviets to strengthen the Egyptian army. One of Nasser's significant goals was to invest in Egypt's economy by constructing a dam on the Nile River. However, economic support was needed to complete the dam project. For this purpose, Nasser attempted to obtain a loan from the United States, but due to Nasser's proximity to the Soviets, the U.S. refrained from providing the loan. In response, the Egyptian government decided to nationalize the Suez Canal to complete the dam construction and increase the country's revenues. Until that time, the Suez Canal was managed by the Suez Canal Company controlled by Britain and France. Both countries were not willing to lose control of the Suez Canal to Egypt. Although Britain and France initially attempted to resolve the issue diplomatically, they were unsuccessful. Consequently, Britain, France, and Israel reached an agreement to wage war against Egypt. According to the plan, Israel would attack Egypt, and then Britain and France would intervene as a peacekeeping force under the pretext of ending the war, taking control of the canal. Following the plan, Israel attacked Egypt on October 29, 1956. When the Egyptian army was caught unprepared for war, Israel quickly seized the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula. In November, British and French forces landed in Port Said and Port Fouad, claiming to end the war, and started occupying the canal area. The Soviet Union strongly opposed this war against Egypt. What surprised Britain and France the most was the United States also taking an anti-war stance. President Eisenhower did not want this seemingly meaningless war to escalate into a major conflict between the West and the Soviet Union. Additionally, supporting Britain and France in the region could lead Arab countries to establish close relations with the Soviet Union. As a result, Eisenhower chose to adopt an anti-war stance. Left alone by the U.S., Britain and France could not withstand increasing Soviet pressure and withdrew from the region in December. Israel withdrew from the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip in March 1957. Thus, despite defeats in the war, Egypt emerged as the winner at the negotiating table and gained control of the Suez Canal. Israel's attack on Egypt by reaching an agreement with France and Britain led to renewed tensions in the relations between Israel and the Arab states in the region. As a result of this tension, numerous border conflicts occurred between Israel and the Arab states until the year 1960. In November 1966, Egypt signed a defense agreement with Syria, further escalating the tension in the region. On May 13, 1967, the Soviet Union informed the Egyptian government that Israel would declare war on Egypt the next day. Based on the information provided by the Soviet Union, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser swiftly deployed the Egyptian army to the Sinai Peninsula. In the following days, Jordan and Syria also amassed military forces along their borders with Israel. On May 22nd, Egypt blockaded the Strait of Tiran, preventing Israel from crossing into the Red Sea. Following this move, the Israeli government decided to go to war. Over 200 Israeli aircraft entered Egyptian airspace at 4:45 a.m. on June 5th, bombing Egyptian airbases where warplanes were stationed. The airstrike was highly successful for Israel, resulting in the destruction of over 300 Egyptian aircraft by the end of the operation. At 11 a.m., Israeli territories were targeted by Syrian and Jordanian aircraft. In response, Israel attacked Syrian and Jordanian airbases, successfully destroying 28 Jordanian and 53 Syrian aircraft. Thus, air superiority completely shifted to Israel. Israel also captured Gaza on the same day. While the operations continued on June 6th and 7th, the Israeli army took control of the West Bank under Jordan's administration. On June 8th, the Israeli army captured the Sinai Peninsula. Advancing northward on June 9th, the Israeli army seized control of the Golan Heights under Syria's administration, achieving victory on all fronts. With the intervention of the United Nations, a ceasefire was signed on June 10th. According to the agreement, Israel retained its gains in all captured territories, expanding its borders by approximately 2.5 times in just 6 days. Approximately 6 years after this war, on October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria declared war on Israel to reclaim lost territories. The Israeli army, caught unprepared for the war, suffered initial defeats in the Golan Heights on the first day of the war. The Egyptian army, without encountering significant resistance, managed to cross east of the Suez Canal. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat decided to keep the Egyptian army in the region rather than advancing it into Israel. Sadat's goal was not to liberate Palestine from Israeli occupation. Instead, it aimed to secure support by crossing east of the Suez Canal and eventually gaining control of the Sinai Peninsula. In other words, the war was fought not for the liberation of Palestine but to regain lost territories for Egypt and Syria. As planned, the Egyptian army successfully held its positions in the Suez Canal until October 25th. During this period, the tension between the Soviet Union and the United States dangerously escalated. In efforts to prevent this war from turning into a world war, the United Nations facilitated ceasefire agreements between Israel and Egypt on October 25th. Following the ceasefire, Israel gradually withdrew from the Sinai Peninsula and part of the Golan Heights through agreements signed until May 1974. Thus, Anwar Sadat's plan succeeded, and Egypt regained control of some of the lost territories. However, Gaza and the West Bank remained under Israeli administration. By the year 1993, an agreement signed in Oslo, the capital of Norway, between Israeli and Palestinian representatives led to the transfer of Gaza to Palestinian control. In 1995, the administration of the West Bank was handed over to the Palestinian Authority, provided that the region remained under the control of Israeli security forces. It was believed that this agreement between the two countries would largely resolve the issues in the region. However, the agreement did not prove sufficient to resolve the problems between the two countries. From 1995 to the present day, thousands of lives, including civilians, have been lost on both sides of the conflict.